Okay, let's unpack this. We're stepping into a world that, whispers of these legendary figures hidden from the glare of history, figures said to be subtly guiding humanity.
It really taps into that deep, maybe universal craving we sometimes have.
Right, to make sense of profound ideas, connect with wisdom that feels timeless, and maybe explore how those borders between verifiable history, enduring legend, and really personal experience can sometimes blur. It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. It's a space that definitely challenges our usual ways of knowing things, where the empirical tools we normally rely on kind of hit their limits.
Yeah.
And we're left grappling with these narratives that, well, they demand a different kind of understanding, don't they?
Absolutely. And our focus today is on one specific figure, Mahavatar Babaji. For many people, especially in the modern yoga world, he's central to that landscape of thought and practice. And he was brought into global consciousness really primarily through Paramahansa Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi. Such a widely read book.
Oh, absolutely pivotal. That book took a figure known mostly in, let's say, relatively secluded circles in India and just introduced him to a massive worldwide audience. It sparked so much curiosity, so much devotion across totally different cultures.
Right. So for this deep dive, our mission isn't really to stand in judgment. We're not trying to prove or disprove the claims around Babaji.
No, that's not the point. And frankly, it's probably not even possible given the nature of the material we have.
Exactly. Instead, our goal is to take this stack of source material, classic spiritual texts, insights from comparative mythology, perspectives from psychology, lots of anecdotal accounts too, and just really immerse ourselves in it.
Yeah, dig deep.
We want to try and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights, just to understand the narrative as it's actually presented.
Yes, exactly. To understand who this figure is said to be, according to these sources. What are the extraordinary stories describing his nature, his activities? What traditions is he linked to?
And crucially, how do these powerful narratives resonate, across different ways of looking at the world, from faith and belief right through to psychology and myth? So our mission today is really to help you, our listener, become truly well-informed about this, intriguing and complex figure. We'll explore the core story, put it in its wider context culturally, spiritually, and look at the different ways people encounter or understand or maybe even critique such a presence.
It's quite a story. It spans centuries, touches on these really fundamental human questions about our potential, about guidance, the nature of reality itself.
Definitely. So get ready, because this is a deep dive into a profound and, let's be honest, often mysterious narrative.
Let's begin then.
Okay, kicking off with part one. Let's look at the initial unveiling of this figure, Mahavatar Babaji. The sources often call him the Deathless Master.
Right.
And as we said, Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi is really the main text that brought him to global attention.
It's the starting point for so many people. And the way he's depicted there is quite specific, isn't it? He's not presented as some kind of public figure, addressing crowds or seeking fame.
No, quite the opposite, it seems.
Exactly the opposite. He's characterized as this deliberately secluded master, someone operating quietly, almost, you could say, anonymously, mostly from remote parts of the Himalayas.
That intentional withdrawal, that seems really significant in how he's portrayed.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
His work is described as this silent power, a behind-the-scenes force working for humanity's spiritual upliftment. But it's not just for a short time. The scope is described as millennial.
Wow, millennial.
Yeah. And he actively avoids what the sources call the misinterpreting glare of publicity. The idea is that public attention would just distort or hinder the subtle work he's doing.
So it positions him as someone focused on the very, very long game, the slow evolution of consciousness over vast timescales, not immediate recognition.
Precisely that. And fundamental to understanding who he is, as presented in these sources, is the term avatara.
Right, avatara. It's a term we hear a lot. But what does it really mean in this context?
Okay, so avatara is Sanskrit. It comes from the root avatrai, which basically means to pass down or to descend. It signifies the deliberate descent, the manifestation of divinity into a physical form, into flesh here on earth.
So it's not just a human achieving enlightenment.
No, it's portrayed as a divine being taking on a human guise for a specific purpose. And Babaji is specifically called a Mahavatar.
Maha-avatar, great avatar.
Exactly, great avatar. And his role, as the narrative describes it, is unique even among avatars. He isn't said to have founded one single religion or appeared as a central figure for just one group.
Okay.
Instead, his mission is described as assisting other prophets, other masters, founders of spiritual movements, with their specific work. He's depicted almost as a source or an initiator for figures across different traditions.
Can you give some examples from the sources? Who is he linked to?
Well, the narratives connect him to initiating really key figures in Indian spiritual history. For instance, the 8th century philosopher Adi Shankaracharya.
The one credited with reorganizing the Swami order.
That's the one, credited with organizing it into its 10 main monastic branches. Bobby is said to have initiated him. And he's also linked to the 15th century mystic poet Kabir.
Kabir, wow, a huge figure in both Hindu and Sufi traditions, known for being so inclusive.
Exactly. So, initiating both Shankara and Kabir, it positions Babaji as this foundational source, working behind the scenes, influencing what seem like quite different spiritual streams throughout history.
That's remarkable. It paints him as someone transcending sectarian lines, working for the bigger picture of spiritual evolution.
That's precisely the picture painted, working for the broader spiritual evolution of humankind.
And is titled Deathless Master. What does that actually mean in these sources? It sounds extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And it's probably the most striking and often the most debated aspect of his story. Babaji is described as having retained his physical form, his actual body, for an incredibly long time, centuries, maybe even millennia. His state of being is repeatedly described as, well, beyond human comprehension, referring to this ability to exist in a physical body indefinitely, without the usual processes of aging, decay, death. Yogananda uses this metaphor, calling him a transcendental star.
Is there a description of what this deathless form actually looks like?
Yes, the sources give quite a vivid physical description, which adds to the whole mystique. He's said to have this appearance of perpetual youth, looking no older than, say, 25.
Always 25.
Always 25. Fair-skinned, medium height and build, a strong, beautiful physique, and radiating this perceptible glow.
That glow feels important, not just light, but maybe a sign of his inner state.
I think that's exactly the interpretation, an outward sign of his inner spiritual purity and power. His facial features are often highlighted too. Dark, calm, very tender eyes, and long, lustrous hair, usually described as copper-colored.
And there's that strange detail about his resemblance to his disciple, Lahirī Mahasaya.
Yes. It's mentioned as really striking. Lahirī Mahasaya, who was much older when they met in the 19th century, apparently looks so much like Babaji that, paradoxically, the aged Lahiri could easily be mistaken for Babaji's father.
Even though Babaji looked like a young man, that's bizarre.
It is bizarre. It's often interpreted as symbolizing the incredibly deep, almost like familial connection between them. Or maybe the master's essence being reflected in the disciple's own perfected state.
Suggests a resonance far deeper than just physical looks.
Indeed. And beyond just appearance, the sources describe qualities that just fundamentally transcend normal human physical limits. He reportedly doesn't need food to sustain his body.
No food at all.
Apparently not. Though he might occasionally accept offerings, as a courtesy or maybe to share in the human experience with his disciples. And even more symbolically, his perfected form is sometimes said to cast no shadow or leave no footprints.
Wow. And these aren't just presented as, party tricks, are they? Simple miracles.
No, not at all. They're specifically interpreted as outward symbolic proofs of an inward freedom from darkness and material bondage.
Okay.
So no shadow symbolizes complete freedom from material limits, from ignorance. No footprint suggests a state not fully bound by earthly laws, by gravity in the same way we are. These phenomena are framed as physical signs of his total spiritual liberation.
So his actual physical presence is a teaching?
Exactly. A living symbol of the potential state that Kriya Yoga is supposed to lead to. The sources also mentioned he's not always visible in the same way. He's said to appear only when he chooses to. And accounts describe him sometimes appearing in slightly different forms to different people, maybe with a beard and mustache sometimes, or briefly looking like a young boy or an older man, before reverting to his usual youthful look. This flexibility just underlines that his form isn't bound by the same rigid limits as ours.
And this figure who transcends physical norms, he also seems to transcend history as we usually record it.
Completely. That's a key characteristic emphasized again and again. There's a total lack of any verifiable biographical data about his origins. No record of family, birthplace, birth name, no conventional timeline.
Nothing.
Nothing. And this absence isn't presented as missing information, like a gap in the record. It's presented as a deliberate hallmark of his earth-released state.
Meaning
Freedom from the karmic ties, the social connections, the family history, the personal past that define and, bind a normal mortal life.
he doesn't fit into a standard historical record because he's portrayed as existing outside that whole linear flow.
Precisely. Even his name is simple, Babaji. It's just a respectful, honorific meaning revered father.
But his disciples gave him other titles.
Oh, yes, reflecting their deep reverence.
Right.
Titles like Mahavatar Babaji Maharaj, which means something like great silent sage, revered father, great king, also Maha-yogi, great yogi, and sometimes just Shiva Baba.
And there's that powerful quote attributed to Lahirī Mahasaya about the name itself having power.
Yes, that's central for devotees. Lahirī Mahasaya is quoted saying, "Whenever anyone utters with reverence the name of Babaji, that devotee attracts an instant spiritual blessing."
Wow.
So the suggestion is the name isn't just a label. It carries a potent spiritual vibration, a direct energetic link to his presence or grace that could bring immediate spiritual benefit if you invoke it sincerely.
So putting it all together, he's presented as this intensely private, eternally youthful master, a kind of hidden source for diverse spiritual paths, whose very physical existence is shown as a symbol of ultimate spiritual freedom, defined by eternal purpose, not a past.
That really captures the core depiction of Babaji as laid out in those primary sources, yes.
Okay, moving into part 2 then. Let's focus on what the sources describe as Mahavatar Babaji's specific divine commission, particularly for our modern times, the revival and spread of Kriya Yoga.
Right, this is framed as the central divinely ordained mission. The reason Babaji kind of reemerged onto the world stage, so to speak, back in the 19th century.
And the Kriya Yoga he brought forward, it wasn't seen as something totally new.
No, not at all. It's explicitly presented as a restoration of a lost art. An ancient scientific technique designed specifically to speed up human evolution and help people achieve God realization.
So bringing back something that existed before but got hidden or forgotten somehow.
Exactly. The narrative clearly links Kriya Yoga to ancient wisdom. It's as the same science of breath and life force control that Lord Krishna taught Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita.
Wow.
And it's also said to have been known by ancient sages like Patanjali, who compiled the Yoga Sutras. And even, remarkably, known to Jesus Christ and some of his disciples, like St. John and St. Paul.
Okay, so why did it get lost then, according to the story?
The sources blame its disappearance, or at least its becoming hidden, on the dark ages of materialism. A period, especially linked to the Kali Yuga in Hindu cosmology, when humanity became too focused on external material things, losing touch with these deeper inner spiritual sciences.
And its reintroduction now is seen as timely, suited for the modern scientific age.
That's the idea. That with the rise of scientific thinking, especially around physiology and psychology, modern people are better equipped to grasp the psychophysiological basis of Kriya Yoga.
How it actually works on the body and mind.
Right. How specific techniques using breath control, pranayama, and focused meditation directly affect the nervous system, the flow of energy, and ultimately consciousness itself, speeding up that evolutionary process.
And the key moment for this revival is that famous encounter with Lahirī Mahasaya in 1861. It's described almost like a mythic event.
It really is portrayed as a moment of huge spiritual drama. Lahirī Mahasaya at the time was, a very ordinary man in worldly terms, 33 years old, an accountant for the British government in India, married family man.
Which, as you mentioned, was quite different from the usual image of a renunciate yogi back then.
Absolutely. His normal life is really emphasized to highlight how revolutionary this was. The narrative even states that his job transfer to the remote Himalayan town of Raniket wasn't just random bureaucracy. Babaji himself supposedly silently suggested the transfer into the mind of Lahiri's boss.
How is that explained? How could he do that?
Well, it's used to illustrate the master's profound unity with universal consciousness. The explanation given is something like, when one feels his unity with mankind, all minds become transmitting stations through which he can work at will.
Interesting. So the job transfer itself was divinely orchestrated to set up the meeting.
That's the story, and the meeting itself. Well, Lahirī Mahasaya was apparently wandering in the hills near Ranakhet, near Dronagiri Mountain, when he heard a distant voice calling his name.
Just calling his name out of nowhere.
Yeah. Compelled by some force he couldn't explain, he followed the sound, and it led him to a clearing with some caves. And there he met this smiling young man with long, copper-colored hair who, again, looked uncannily like himself. This was Babaji.
That resemblance again. It keeps coming up.
It's definitely a recurring motif. And upon meeting, Babaji touched Lahirī Mahasaya's forehead, a touch that supposedly triggered sweet seed memories, instantly bringing back the full awareness of a past life where Lahirī had been Babaji's disciple in those exact caves.
So not a first meeting at all, but a remembering, a reunion across lifetimes.
That's how the narrative presents it. And then the sources describe this incredible metaphysical event for the initiation itself. To supposedly remove any last traces of earthly delusion from Lahirī, Babaji manifested a huge golden palace out of pure thought.
Manifested a palace, like conjured it out of nothing.
That is the description in the sources, yes. A glittering, majestic building appearing seemingly from nowhere, and Lahirī Mahasaya was formally initiated into Kriya Yoga inside this ephemeral palace.
Wow.
And then as soon as the initiation was done, the palace just dematerialized, vanished as quickly as it had appeared, dissolving back into, the invisible fabric of consciousness.
And what was the point of that? What was the lesson?
Babaji explained it to Lahirī. He said that palace was a tangible demonstration of the nature of the whole cosmos, that the physical universe, solid as it seems, is ultimately like that palace, a materialized thought of the Creator, a projection held together only by divine will.
So the vanishing palace was a direct lesson in Maya, the illusory nature of the world.
Exactly. An unforgettable direct lesson, a deeply symbolic, visually stunning way to teach a really complex metaphysical idea.
And right after this mind-blowing initiation, Babaji gave Lahirī Mahasaya this revolutionary instruction.
He did. Instead of telling him to renounce the world, become a monk living in isolation, which was the standard path for seeking the highest yogic states, then Babaji strictly commanded him not to do that.
He told him to go back to his job, his family, his normal life.
Precisely. The instruction was clear. Return to your family and worldly duties. Mingle in the world of men, and serve as an ideal yogi householder. He had to keep living an ordinary life while pursuing and demonstrating the highest states of yoga.
Why was that considered so radical?
Because, historically, achieving those high spiritual states in India was almost always linked to strict asceticism, renouncing society, withdrawing completely. Babaji's instruction was a conscious spiritual innovation for the modern age, adapted for contemporary life.
And he explained why.
Yes, he said something like, the cries of many bewildered worldly men and women have not fallen unheard on the ears of the great ones. You have been chosen to bring spiritual solace through Kriya Yoga to numerous earnest seekers.
So it was explicitly about making the path accessible to everyday people, not just monks or hermits living in caves.
Exactly that. Lahirī Mahasaya was meant to be a living example, to show that the highest yogic attainments were possible while fulfilling worldly responsibilities. The focus shifted from outer renunciation, physically leaving the world, to inner renunciation.
Meaning cultivating detachment while still being active in the world?
Right. Detachment from ego, from desires while doing your duties. This was seen as crucial for Kriya's potential global spread, especially in what they called the New Age of Energy, or Dwapara Yuga, with its increasing global connection and intellectual focus.
And Lahirī Mahasaya even persuaded Babaji to loosen the rules for getting initiated.
Yes, the sources say he successfully pleaded with Babaji to relax the traditionally very strict, very exclusive requirements for receiving the Kriya technique. This allowed Lahirī to teach it more freely to all sincere seekers, no matter their religion, caste, gender, social status. It really opened the door for mass dissemination.
So this 1861 encounter is seen as the start of the modern Kriya Yoga lineage. Babaji to Lahirī Mahasaya, then to his top disciples like Swarukdeswar Giri, and then to Paramahansa Yogananda.
That's the lineage most widely known, especially through Yogananda's work, yes.
Yeah.
And the narrative really emphasizes the divine guidance over this lineage with another direct intervention from Babaji.
When was that?
In 1920, Yogananda was about to go to America to spread Kriya in the West. And he was feeling uncertain, looking for confirmation.
And Babaji appeared to him. Personally.
Yes, according to Yogananda's account, Babaji materialized right there in his Calcutta home. He confirmed that Yogananda was indeed the chosen one for this mission.
Wow.
Babaji even recounted a previous meeting he'd had with Yogananda's guru, Sri Yukteswar, years earlier at a Kumbh Mela festival. Babaji had told Yukteswar back then that he would send him Yogananda for training, specifically for this purpose.
So it was presented as this long-planned, divinely orchestrated initiative.
Absolutely. Babaji apparently told Yogananda directly, "You are the one I have chosen. Fear not, you will be protected." This personal commission from the Deathless Master gave Yogananda the ultimate spiritual green light, the assurance, the authority he needed to take Kriya to a totally foreign culture. It framed the whole thing as a divinely ordained movement for the modern world.
And this leads right into that conscious effort in the sources to connect Babaji with Christ. That seems crucial for introducing this to the West.
Oh, it was hugely important. A very deliberate piece of, let's call it, theological bridge building. The sources, especially Yogananda's writings, constantly emphasize Babaji's constant communion with Christ. They talk about their joint mission to send out vibrations of redemption, working together for Earth's spiritual evolution.
Why was that emphasis so strong?
Well, think about it. Yogananda was bringing a tradition deeply rooted in Hindu thought to a Western world mostly shaped by Christianity. So presenting Babaji not as a rival to Christ or someone replacing him, but as a collaborator, a spiritual brother.
Calling him the Yogi Christ of modern India.
Exactly. That was a masterful strategy to build rapport, find common ground. It helped Westerners see universal principles at play.
So it reframed Kriya Yoga not as a new religion challenging Christianity, but more like its scientific fulfillment.
Precisely. It presented Kriya as this universal practical technique for getting that direct experience of God, which is the goal of all true spiritual paths, Christianity included. By showing Babaji and Christ working together, it positioned Kriya as something that could complement and deepen your existing faith, made it appealing, non-threatening. You could embrace yoga without feeling like you had to ditch your Christian identity.
That focus on the scientific aspect and the shift to the yogi householder model really do seem perfectly designed for the modern age and for global spread.
It was a fundamental adaptation, wasn't it? Recognizing that traditional monasticism, while totally valid, just wasn't practical for most people in complex modern societies. Inner renunciation detachment cultivated right in the middle of daily life became the key, allowing deep spiritual growth even while juggling family, career, all the usual stuff.
Okay, let's transition now to part 3. We need to broaden our view a bit and look at how this figure, Mahavatar Babaji, as he's presented, resonates with patterns we see across global mythologies and even psychological ideas, what we're calling global archetypes.
Yes, because while the specific Babaji story is tied to Kriya Yoga, the core idea, this eternal, hidden spiritual guide or source of wisdom, it's a pattern that pops up in many cultures throughout history.
So it taps into something maybe deeper than just one unique story.
Exactly. It suggests Babaji connects with some kind of universal human intuition, or maybe a structure within our collective psyche. This sense that there's a timeless source of wisdom, guidance, operating maybe subtly behind the scenes, beyond our everyday view.
What are some examples, comparative figures from other traditions?
Well, within India itself, the clearest parallels are the ancient Rishis, the seers of the Vedic tradition.
Right.
They aren't seen as the authors of the Vedas, but as the ones who heard the eternal truths Shruti directly in deep states of consciousness and then passed them on. Figures like Agastya, Vashishta, Bharadwaja. They're revered as these foundational teachers, starting lineages of knowledge covering everything from metaphysics to, well, maybe even early forms of science.
And some Kriya traditions actually link Babaji to them.
Yes, some accounts connect him specifically with being a disciple of Rishi Agastya, which roots him even deeper in that ancient lineage of wisdom keepers. And this connection also fits with the idea of the Karanjivas in Hindu lore.
The immortals?
Exactly, the 7 or sometimes more immortal beings destined to remain on Earth throughout this current dark age, the Kali Yuga.
And what's their job, supposedly?
They're described as custodians of Dharma cosmic law, righteousness. Figures like Hanuman, Ashwathama, and maybe the most striking parallel to Babaji is Markandeya.
Markandeya.
Yeah, a sage said to live through vast cosmic cycles, witnessing the dissolution and recreation of the universe, preserving sacred wisdom through it all. Their role is about the slow, ongoing preservation of spiritual knowledge, not just one big event.
So immortal guardians of cosmic truth. Got it.
Precisely. Now, if we look outside India, a really powerful parallel in the Judeo-Christian tradition is the figure of Melchizedek.
Ah, Melchizedek from Genesis. He just appears, right? No backstory.
Exactly. And the way the Epistle to the Hebrews describes him later is remarkably similar to Babaji's ahistorical nature, without father or mother or genealogy, and has neither beginning of days nor end of life.
That description is uncanny, almost word for word like some descriptions of Babaji.
It's a very strong echo. Melchizedek is called the King of Salem, often taken as King of Peace or Jerusalem, and priest of the Most High God, El Elyon. That's a non-sectarian name for God. And he blesses Abraham, who gives him a tithe.
What's the significance of that interaction with Abraham?
Well, Melchizedek represents this universal priesthood, one that exists outside and actually predates the specific hereditary priesthood that came later with Aaron and the Levites in Israel. His authority seems to come directly from God, not from lineage or any institution. He serves a universal God. And even Abraham, the patriarch, recognizes and defers to his spiritual authority. Later, Hebrews uses Melchizedek as the archetype for Jesus Christ's eternal priesthood, calling Jesus a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. It links Christ to this primordial, timeless, universal spiritual authority.
A figure transcending established religious structures, connecting directly to the divine.
Exactly. Another interesting parallel comes from ancient Iran, the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster.
Ah, okay.
Like Babaji, like Melchizedek, he's presented as this profound spiritual reformer who got direct revelation from the supreme wise god Ahura Mazda. His teaching set up this framework of cosmic dualism, the struggle between truth, Asha, and falsehood, Druj. Humanity has to make moral choices, use free will.
Which resonates with that yogic idea of the inner battle between ignorance, avidya, and knowledge, vidya.
Yes, it mirrors that fundamental spiritual struggle that Kriya Yoga is designed to help practitioners navigate and ultimately win. Zarathustra's teachings are thought to have really influenced later Abrahamic religions, making him a figure of huge world historical spiritual impact.
And even much later thinkers were drawn to him, like Nietzsche using him and thus spoke Zarathustra.
Right, Nietzsche chose Zarathustra specifically because he saw him as the first prophet to frame the world in terms of good versus evil. So in Nietzsche's view, Zarathustra had to be the first to overcome that moral framework. It just underlines Zarathustra's enduring power as a foundational archetype, someone associated with setting up and maybe transcending core worldviews.
So these comparisons suggest the idea of an eternal guiding source isn't just confined to one tradition. It's a recurring theme in the human spiritual search.
Which leads us very naturally into the psychological perspective, especially through a Jungian lens. From this viewpoint, this recurring archetype of the eternal, hidden spiritual master is seen as a manifestation of the collective unconscious.
The collective unconscious.
Yeah, those innate universal patterns and images shared by all humans. It often shows up in dreams, myths, spiritual stories as the wise old man, or sometimes the magician archetype.
Representing inherent wisdom, the power to transform within our own minds.
Exactly. This figure is understood as an inner guide, a personification of intuitive knowledge, spiritual wisdom that lies deeper than our everyday conscious ego. This archetype often appears in dreams or visions or moments of insight, especially during times of crisis or seeking or big life changes. It offers guidance for what Jung called individuation.
Individuation, the journey to becoming a whole integrated self.
Right. So figures like Babaji or Melchizedek or the Rishis can be seen as the external cultural forms given to this internal psychic reality.
Projections of an inner truth.
You could say that, projections of the potential for a guiding, all-knowing, benevolent force within our own consciousness. And in the yogic tradition, this is explicitly recognized. They call it the Antarguru.
The inner guru, the teacher within.
Exactly. And in that framework, the external guru's main job is actually to awaken or reveal this inner source of light, to help the disciple connect with their own deepest wisdom. There's that famous line in the Bhagavad Gita, cause the deliverance of the self by the self. It points to this ultimate truth, that real rescue, real transformation, comes from accessing that deeper part of yourself, the higher self.
And the stories of these great masters, they help us connect with that potential inside.
They act as powerful catalysts, yeah. By personifying the goal union with this inner, eternal self, they inspire faith, they give us a kind of map for the inner journey, and motivate the effort needed. From a psychological view, an encounter with an eternal master could be understood as a profound encounter with the timeless, deepest part of your own being.
There's an interesting point made about the authority of these figures being pre-institutional, before the formal structures.
Yes, that's a key insight from comparing them. The Rishis didn't come from Hinduism. The Vedas, the basis of Hinduism, came from their insight.
Ah, okay.
Melchizedek's priesthood is innate, universal, recognized by Abraham before the Israelite temple system. Babaji, similarly, is shown as standing outside or above the specific lineages he starts or helps, like the Swami order or Kriya Yoga itself.
So their authority comes directly from divine truth, unmediated.
Yes, untainted by human dogma, politics, organizations. That quality makes them powerful archetypes for spiritual reform and really appealing to modern seekers who might feel, alienated from traditional religious institutions.
And finally, the concept of immortality itself. It can be seen as more than just literal endless life, right? It has a deeper symbolic meaning, too.
Absolutely. Beyond the literal claim of a deathless body, immortality works as this potent metaphor. It symbolizes the eternal, unchanging, incorruptible nature of the wisdom and spiritual truth these figures embody.
Okay.
In a world where everything changes, decays, where human teachers are mortal, the idea of an immortal guru acts like a guarantee. It ensures the purity, the continuity, the timelessness of the spiritual teaching being passed down.
Like Babaji being the guardian of this secret knowledge, making sure Kriya stays pure.
Exactly. His deathless body becomes a living symbol of his deathless contribution to spiritual knowledge. So from this angle, believing in physical immortality isn't just about biology. It's a statement of deep faith in the perennial, incorruptible nature of the path itself. The form is the perfect vessel for eternal truth.
So these archetypes, these psychological concepts, they give us ways to understand the profound idea that the Babaji story represents, not just the literal details.
They really show how the story resonates with these deep universal patterns in our human search for guidance, for wisdom, for timeless truth.
Okay, let's move into part 4 now. Here we have to confront a fundamental tension, really, in understanding someone like Babaji. It's the divergence between, on one hand, the deeply personal, subjective experience of faith and devotion, and on the other hand, the rigorous, often skeptical viewpoint of objective analysis and critical inquiry.
These are two very different ways of knowing, aren't they?
Right.
And the sources themselves, by making such extraordinary claims, almost invite this tension. Acknowledging both sides is really essential for a full, layered understanding.
So on one side, you have these compelling testimonies, people describing direct encounters.
Yes. And for people practicing Kriya Yoga or drawn to this tradition, Babaji often isn't talked about like some historical figure. He's spoken of as a living, active presence.
Right now.
Right now. The literature, and maybe even more importantly, the huge body of anecdotal accounts, the oral tradition within Kriya circles, is filled with stories of encounters. Now, these are subjective, usually impossible to verify externally, but they form the bedrock of faith for many. They're treated as valid records of personal, spiritual experience.
What kinds of encounters do people describe?
Well, they range quite a bit, from extremely rare claims of direct physical or sort of quasi-physical meetings to much more common experiences in what you might call subtle realms. The physical encounter stories often echo those dramatic ones in Yogananda's book.
Like the story of that lawyer in Varanasi.
Yes, that's a classic example. The account of a respected attorney led by a woman identified as Babaji's sister, Mataji, to an underground cave. There he meets this radiant figure described as Babaji in meditation, with red hair in this particular story. He described an hour of silent communion that just left this indelible spiritual mark. Then there's the account of the woman Yogi, seriously ill, alone in the Himalayas. Visited by a radiant figure matching Babaji's picture. She's miraculously healed, guided on how to get home, and the figure even reportedly shows up on a train platform later just to confirm it was real before vanishing.
I mean, these sound like stories straight out of ancient scriptures or mythology.
They really do. And for the people reporting them, they are profoundly real, life-changing events. But more common are the accounts of encounters in subtle realms, visions, dreams, experiences during deep meditation, often unsolicited, happening during intense seeking or personal crisis.
Can you give examples of those?
Sure. One meditator, searching deeply for truth, described this powerful out-of-body experience. Met a divine avatar who telepathically told him there's only infinite love. Later, when he saw Babaji's picture, he recognized him as the being from his vision. Wow. Another devotee, praying intensely, reported Babaji appearing in a dream. Specifically noted his eyes were not looking upward, but straight at me, which brought this deep sense of peace and confirmation.
And the famous Indian actor Rajinikanth, he's spoken about an experience too, hasn't he?
Yes, he's a very well-known devotee of Babaji and Kriya Yoga. He recounted an experience reading Autobiography of a Yogi, said a light came from Babaji's picture on the cover. He felt an instruction to sit in a certain yoga posture, and then the light reportedly entered his body. He describes that as marking his deep spiritual connection to the path.
And beyond these dramatic appearances, there are also experiences people describe just as grace.
Right. This often involves things like synchronicities or obstacles in life seeming to clear away after someone sincerely turns to Babaji or commits to Kriya. You hear accounts of people praying for a Kriya teacher and then, their wife happens to see a newspaper ad for an initiation seminar just days later.
Like meaningful coincidences?
Exactly. Or people who, after committing to the practice, just feel this palpable sense of unseen help. Personal or professional problems seem to resolve themselves in unexpected ways.
Across all these different kinds of encounters, what's the common thread? What's the reported outcome?
The consistent thing reported by devotees is profound inner transformation. It doesn't matter if the encounter was dramatic or subtle, the claimed result is a significant shift inside. Less anger, more compassion, better relationships, deep peace, less fear. For these practitioners, that subjective experience, the felt reality of inner change and guidance, that is the proof of Babaji's living presence and the path's effectiveness. Their personal transformation is the most compelling evidence they need.
But then you absolutely have to bring in the critical inquiry. The perspective that looks at these claims from the outside, demanding verifiable evidence, considering alternative explanations.
And this perspective raises crucial questions you just can't ignore, especially when spiritual claims can sometimes be misused or harmful. From a skeptical viewpoint, the core problem with the Babaji narrative is how insulated it is from empirical validation.
How so?
Well, he's portrayed as this secluded master who only appears when he wants, to whom he chooses. That condition makes the claims about him inherently unfalsifiable by any external investigation. You can't test it.
There's just a fundamental lack of objective, verifiable evidence.
Precisely. No universally accepted historical records outside the Kriya lineage itself. No documented public appearances. No single undisputed photograph. And what's more, even within different branches or interpretations of Kriya Yoga, you find conflicting accounts.
Like what?
Well, Yogananda's lineage presents him as essentially timeless. But other Kriya traditions, like the one popularized by Marshall Govindon, offer a detailed biography claiming a specific birth year, 203 AD, and a whole different historical context.
That kind of difference across traditions, that raises questions, doesn't it, about how the figure is understood, maybe even adapted to fit different schools.
It absolutely invites scrutiny. Some critics might even argue the whole concept of an ancient, hidden, unverifiable master could potentially serve as a kind of marketing ploy.
A marketing ploy?
A strategic invention of ultimate unquestionable authority to legitimize a specific lineage or set of teachings, and thereby attract followers who want that direct link to a high source.
And unfortunately, that vulnerability can be exploited by charlatans.
That is a significant risk, yes, because claims of direct commission or encounter with a hidden, unverifiable master can't be proven or disproven externally. While claiming such a connection to Babaji becomes a very easy way for someone without a real background or attainment to invent one. They can bypass traditional structures, gain instant credibility, attract followers. Many people within authentic Kriya circles are actually very skeptical of modern claims of direct Babaji contact for this very reason. They see it as potentially exploiting the legend for personal gain or creating personality cults.
And beyond potential fraud, there's also a psychological critique, looking at the dynamics of the guru-disciple relationship itself, regardless of the guru's claimed status.
Yes, this perspective, often drawing from depth psychology, suggests that intense devotion to a spiritual figure can sometimes involve a degree of regression, a return to a more childlike state of unconditional devotion and irresponsibility, sometimes called the guru syndrome.
Like projecting needs or idealized images onto the guru figure.
Exactly. It can involve transference. Followers project their deep-seated needs for safety, meaning maybe a perfect parent figure, onto the guru. In Jungian terms, it could be seen as projecting one's own latent divinity, the potential of the higher self, the wise old man within, onto an external teacher, instead of integrating it themselves.
And that projection carries real dangers.
Absolutely. Yeah. It can lead to suspending critical thinking, giving up personal responsibility by putting everything onto the guru, rationalizing the guru's actions, even questionable ones, as some kind of inscrutable divine play. And for the guru figure themselves, it can lead to what's called ego inflation. They start believing in their own projected infallibility, lose their moral compass, become susceptible to the corruption of power, which has tragically led to scandals, abuse, exploitation in some spiritual communities.
So there's this profound paradox here. The very qualities that make Babaji so inspiring within the narrative, his hiddenness, his mystery, his unverifiability, they also make his name and legend uniquely vulnerable to being misused?
It is absolutely a double-edged sword. His status as this secluded master, revealing himself only to the worthy, creates this aura of supreme authority, exclusivity. That's powerful for building faith. But because any claim of direct contact can't be proven or disproven externally, it provides the perfect cover for spiritual fraud or manipulation.
Which puts a huge burden of discernment on the seeker themselves.
Precisely. It really highlights how crucial it is to cultivate inner viveka, spiritual discrimination, discernment. Because external validation, external proof, is often just out of reach. The seeker has to rely on their inner knowing, the results of their own practice, to evaluate the authenticity of claims and teachers.
This whole tension then leads us to maybe reframe that initial myth or truth question. It's not just about whether Babaji exists as a literal, verifiable person.
No. The inquiry pushes us deeper. It becomes a question about the source and the nature of the transformative experiences people report. For devotees, those powerful, subjectively real experiences, peace, love, guidance, interchange, they attribute them to an external divine being, Babaji. For them, the experience is the proof.
But the psychological perspective doesn't necessarily deny the experience itself, just attributes it differently.
Exactly. A vision of Babaji isn't dismissed as not real. It's reattributed as the psyche personifying an internal archetype. The wise old man, the self, the Antarguru. The peace or guidance felt is then understood as accessing a deeper level of one's own consciousness, or tapping into the collective unconscious, not necessarily getting grace from an external entity.
So both frameworks acknowledge the transformative power is real.
Yes, they agree on the experience of transformation and insight, but they disagree on its ontology. Where does it come from? An external, immortal God-man, or an internal archetypal aspect of our own psyche? It shifts the conversation from just a historical debate to a really fascinating inquiry into the nature of consciousness itself and the source of spiritual experience.
That feels like a much richer question to explore than just, trying to find a photo or a birth certificate.
It delves into what these figures truly represent on a deeper, more universal level.
Okay, moving into our final section, part V. Let's look at how the yogic framework itself, the tradition where the Babaji narrative comes from, tends to handle this apparent conflict between personal experience and critical analysis. How does it reconcile this myth or truth question?
Well, the sources in the tradition itself seem to suggest that applying that strict Western binary where myth equals untruth and truth equals only empirical fact that fundamentally misunderstands the yogic perspective and the role of sacred narrative within it.
In a conventional Western view, myth is often seen as the opposite of history, the opposite of fact.
Right. But in the yogic framework, and actually in many ancient traditions, myth isn't the opposite of truth. It's seen as a powerful vehicle for conveying a deeper order of truth. A truth that's existential, archetypal, experientially real, even if its literal historical details are maybe secondary or symbolic.
Myth as a container for a deeper meaning.
Exactly. Ancient cultures used mythos to talk about what they saw as emergent truth, profound realities about the soul, the cosmos, the human condition, the connection between the finite and the infinite. Joseph Campbell put it beautifully. Myths are masks of God. Symbolic stories pointing towards transcendent realities that you just can't express directly through logic or facts. Their job is to awaken awe, inspire faith, provide a kind of symbolic map for the inner journey.
So a story doesn't need to be factually, historically accurate to be psychologically, emotionally, or experientially true for someone.
Precisely. From this viewpoint, the narrative of Babaji, with all its seemingly fantastic elements, immortality, manifesting palaces, can be understood as a form of sacred myth. These elements aren't necessarily meant as literal historical reports, like a historian recording a battle.
They function more as teaching myths. Pedagogical myths.
Yes, their primary purpose is to convey profound yogic principles and inspire spiritual transformation. Immortality symbolizes the eternal, unchanging nature of the true self, the Atman, that the practitioner is trying to realize. The dematerializing palace is this vivid, unforgettable lesson in Maya, showing that the whole material cosmos, as solid as it feels, is ultimately like a transient, dreamlike projection of divine consciousness, held in existence by divine will, and ultimately it can dissolve back into that source. His communion with Christ symbolizes the universal, non-sectarian path he offers.
So the purpose is to teach timeless truths and spark interchange, not provide a factual biography.
That's the perspective. The timeless truths these symbols represent are primary. The literal factuality of the specific event is secondary, maybe even irrelevant from this standpoint. The story serves the truth it conveys, not the other way around.
How is Babaji specifically understood within the Kriya tradition itself, then, beyond just the mythic level?
Well, he is deeply revered as the Satguru, the true or highest guru of the lineage. But a really key aspect of the Kriya teachings, emphasized by masters like Lahirī Mahasaya and Yogananda, is that the practice itself is designed to guide people away from just a simple personality cult around an external figure, towards an internalized realization of the divine. The emphasis is consistently put on the teaching and the practice, not solely on worshiping the teacher's personality.
Lahirī Mahasaya's own life seems like the best example of that.
Exactly. Even though he was God-realized, received this direct commission, he stayed a humble householder. And crucially, he advised his disciples who came from all backgrounds, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, not to abandon their own faith. He told them to adhere to the good, traditional discipline of their own faith and just integrate Kriya practice into it.
So Kriya wasn't presented as a replacement religion?
No, absolutely not. It was presented as a universal, practical, scientific technique to speed up spiritual growth and get direct God contact, designed to be integrated into any sincere spiritual path. Lahirī Mahasaya's message was always practical, experiential. Solve all your problems through meditation. Exchange unprofitable religious speculations for actual God contact. Use the technique to clear away the dogmatic theological debris and access the fresh, healing waters of direct perception.
That strong focus on direct experience, on inner practice, it seems like an inbuilt way to discourage just depending on an external personality.
It really is. By emphasizing the student's own diligent practice and the subjective experience of inner change that results, the focus shifts away from blind belief in some external authority towards validating the truth within yourself.
And for more advanced practitioners, Babaji takes on an even deeper meaning.
Yes, for them, he becomes the personification of the Antarguru, the inner guru, that enlightened consciousness, the self, residing within the practitioner. As one teacher in the tradition puts it, the light that Babaji represents is within all of us.
So the external guru's ultimate job is to lead you to recognize and connect with the master inside yourself.
That's the profound goal, yes. And this leads to understanding Babaji consciousness is the ultimate aim of the Kriya path. It's not just about meeting a person. It's about becoming, realizing, and embodying that state of cosmic awareness, unconditional love, selfless service, divine union that the figure of Babaji represents.
And Kriya Yoga practice itself is the bridge, the means to get from the external myths to this internal reality.
Exactly. It is the scientific technique, the practical step-by-step method. Techniques like Kriya Pranayama, controlling the life force through breath and specific meditations, they're designed to purify the nervous system, quiet the mind's chatter, transform the body and brain into a more refined instrument capable of holding higher consciousness.
And there's a specific mantra associated with connecting to this consciousness.
Yes, the Guru mantra, Om Kriya Babaji Nama Om. Repeating and meditating on this mantra is said to tune the practitioner's consciousness to the specific spiritual frequency, the vibration of the master. It makes the supreme intelligence abiding in the crown chakra accessible. It's described as a direct link, not just to a person, but to a state of being, an energy frequency embodied by the master.
So through the practice, the seeker can potentially move from understanding the story of Babaji as an external myth to actually experiencing the reality it points to within themselves.
That's the core idea. The story gives the inspiration, the goal, the state of deathless, cosmic awareness, loving action. The Kriya practice gives the practical method to prove this scriptural truth for yourself, to turn the symbolic narrative into a lived, experiential reality right there in the sacred laboratory of your own consciousness.
What about those more dramatic, sometimes challenging stories within the narrative? Like Babaji striking a disciple with a log or commanding someone to jump off a cliff. They seem almost contradictory to a path of peace.
Right, those stories can be jarring. Within the tradition, they're often interpreted as serving a specific function, as dharma protectors for the lineage and teachings.
Dharma protectors.
Yeah. They're not meant just as tales of arbitrary supernatural power. They're seen as powerful teaching myths meant to establish the guru's absolute authority, to demonstrate that the master's actions, even if they seem harsh or baffling by our normal standards, come from a place of profound wisdom and perfect understanding of the disciple's karma and needs.
A kind of warning, maybe? A test.
Perhaps. They serve as a potent reminder that the path can be tough, that the master's methods might be beyond the disciple's immediate understanding or judgment, and that total faith, total surrender to the guru's guidance, are seen as prerequisites for navigating the path safely. It creates a kind of protective boundary around the teachings, discouraging those who aren't serious, reinforcing the gravity of the guru-disciple relationship, and ultimately helping to keep the transmission pure.
So we can really see that understanding Babaji within this yogic framework involves appreciating all these multiple layers of meaning at the same time.
Exactly. He can be understood as a literal, immortal being, and as a potent symbol of the eternal self, and as a manifestation of the inner guru, and as the embodiment of Babaji consciousness, that ultimate state. These levels aren't seen as mutually exclusive. They're more like nested layers of truth that reveal themselves more deeply as you progress on the path.
That framework really allows for integrating those seemingly disparate perspectives we talked about earlier, the devotee experience, the skepticism, the archetypal view.
It offers a way where myth, personal experience, and the pursuit of inner truth aren't necessarily seen as conflicting with factual reality, but as different, valid expressions of a deeper, multidimensional truth.
So, to bring this deep dive to a close now, we've journeyed quite a distance from the foundational narrative of Mahavatar Babaji as this deathless master unveiled in modern times, through exploring how he resonates with universal archetypes across myths and psychology. We've looked at that fascinating tension between personal testimonies of encounter and the necessary questions from skepticism and critical analysis.
Right.
And finally, we tried to reconcile these views through the lens of the yogic tradition itself, where myth can be a vehicle for a higher truth.
It's a journey that really highlights how a single figure, a single narrative, can be understood and experienced in such incredibly diverse and profound ways, depending on the perspective you bring to it.
And when we come back to that initial question that often kicks things off, is the story of Babaji myth or truth? Our exploration really suggests that's maybe, well, it's a false dichotomy.
It really seems to be. The sources, the different perspectives we've looked at, they suggest Babaji can be understood simultaneously on multiple valid levels of reality. He's revered as a Mahavatar in a living tradition of faith. He's an expression of a powerful universal archetype in our psyche.
He can be seen as a psychological projection of our own inner wisdom, our potential.
Right. His story functions as sacred myth, conveying deep spiritual truths. And crucially, for Kriya practitioners, he represents Baji consciousness, the very state they're striving for.
These different layers aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. They can build on each other, right? Each adding a dimension.
Exactly. The external narrative, the figure, can be the inspiration that awakens the internal search, the recognition of these deeper layers within yourself.
And ultimately, as the sources within the tradition seem to suggest, the most significant truth isn't found in trying to prove or disprove his physical existence externally or in endless debate.
No. It resides in the response to an internal question, an internal calling. The enduring power of the Babaji narrative, its ability to change lives, inspire deep seeking, it lies less in its verifiable history and more in its capacity to awaken something profound within the individual who encounters it with an open heart, a sincere desire for truth.
So as we conclude this deep dive, let's turn that question directly to you, our listener, based on everything we've explored. What does the figure and narrative of Mahavatar Babaji, whether you perceive him as a literal mortal being, a powerful symbol, an archetypal force, or maybe a state of consciousness, what does it awaken within you?
Yeah, does the concept of an ever-present, immortal, unconditionally loving guide, does that inspire you? Does it spark curiosity about your own potential for transformation, your own evolution?
Does the story call you to look inward, beyond the external debates, to maybe explore practices of self-discipline, service, or perhaps to cultivate your own sense of inner guidance, that Antarguru we talked about?
The answer, as the masters teach within this tradition, isn't ultimately found in external authority, external validation, or external proof.
It is found, and it is proven, in the sacred laboratory of your own consciousness. The true encounter, the most significant realization, is the one that happens within.